Alright guys, plenty to discuss in today's video, let's jump into it. Guys, welcome back to another video on the channel and to another episode of the Championship Roundup. Thankfully, we only had one game which was postponed this weekend, so we've still got 11 matches to go ahead and talk over in today's video. And then in the second half of the video, we've also got some midweek action to go ahead and preview for some of the rearranged fixtures. So as always, do get your score predictions in the comments down below for those games, and any of your other thoughts from the action over the weekend. Starting out in Wales, where we had Blackburn picking up all 3 points as they got their way past Cardiff thanks to a Joe Rodwell goal in the first half. Brilliant take as well, brilliant run from midfield. Aidan Flint just left a little bit exposed in that Cardiff backline and just bends it around him fabulously. And I'm glad that Rodwell now is properly getting that sort of recognition for how important he actually is to this Blackburn side because of the goals and assists lately. But yeah, real one to watch out for. In terms of how the rest of the game unfolded though, Cardiff seemed to have Blackburn at arm's length really, and on another day probably get a point from this one. Didn't have a ridiculous amount of quality going for them in the final third, but they certainly put Blackburn into a couple of uncomfortable positions, you know, with some balls coming into the box, set pieces and things like that. But ultimately that quality in the final third just came up a little bit short for them. For Blackburn so far this season, they have been unbelievably clinical, maybe even unsustainably clinical, and I'd be interested to know from some Rovers fans, what's your general take on this one? Because in terms of shots per 90 away from home so far this season, Blackburn are actually 23rd in the league, which may be a little bit of a surprise. In general terms so far this season, Blackburn are 18th in the league for shots per 90, so it shows that they're not actually creating a ridiculous amount of chances, certainly not compared to some of the other teams in and around their, you know, their automatic places at this point in time. But they have been by far and away the most clinical side in the league up until this point, and that's why they are in the position that they're in at the moment. You know, they only had one shot on target in this game and they ended up with all 3 points. So I'd be interested to know from Blackburn fans, do you see that as a positive of the season so far, or are you slightly concerned by those lack of clear-cut chances which are being created? Because you can sort of take that one of two ways really. I remember a very similar occurrence a couple of years ago with Reading when their, you know, clinical numbers were absolutely through the roof, and in the end, towards the second end of the season, there was just that little bit of a regression, and ultimately they ended up slipping out of the top 6. But brilliant win for them there, all things considered, especially considering that red card to Ryan Nyambe in the second half. And as the second early kick-off, what a game we had in this one. Luton 3, Bournemouth 2. Now, none of us really knew how Luton were going to come back into Championship action because it had been so long since we'd last seen them. Obviously, they were in action in the FA Cup, but back in proper Championship action, teams have been quite 50-50 really with how their levels have been at. You know, some have looked really quite jaded and sloppy, but some have absolutely hit the ground running. It seemed like the rest had done them some good. Well, Luton started this game like an absolute house on fire. First off was absolutely unbelievable stuff. Kelly with the own goal, Adebayo causing all sorts of problems for that goal. Campbell with the second, an absolute strike from outside the box. But the changes Bournemouth made in the second half seemed to have the desired effect. You know, Marcondes gets them back into it after some brilliant work from Jack Stacey, and then Lowe and Rodgers link up for the equaliser. And at that point, it seemed like Bournemouth were the side in the ascendancy, and if you were going to back on either team to go on and win this one, it would probably be the away side. But Cal Naismith, and to be honest, he's probably been one of the unsung heroes of the season so far, actually, with how good he's been for Luton, pops up with the winner. And Luton are one of those sort of wild card teams at the moment because of how many games in hand they've got on the teams above them. They could, you know, they have it in them to do anything for the rest of the season now. I think I predicted them to finish 10th in my mid-season predictions around about that point of the table, but if they win their 3 games in hand, they'll only be 1 point off the top 6 currently, so anything's possible for them. For Bournemouth, I think they've got some very winnable games coming up over the next few weeks, and I think that they, probably more so than anyone else around the top of the table, could really do with putting together a string of results, because I've looked into their running at the end of this season and they really have a lot of the sort of big hitting games saved for those final few weeks. So if anything, Bournemouth will be looking to add a little bit of breathing space between themselves and whoever's below them going into that final running, which does look quite tough for Bournemouth. Next then to Derby up against Sheffield United, and even with everything going on off the pitch at the moment, with player departures already happening for this Derby squad, you know, Jagielka no longer being there, Graham Shinney, which we'll talk about more in tomorrow's video, this team just carries on delivering on the pitch. Now, none of us really knew what version of Sheffield United we were going to be getting for this game either, because similar to Luton, we've not seen them in Championship action for absolutely ages, and I'm very interested to see what they're looking like in midweek, because I'll be up close and personal watching them at Deepdale, of course. But Derby just keep on proving people wrong, don't they? And what is important to remember is Derby technically are above Sheffield United in the league. You know, they picked up more points than Sheffield United have so far this season. It's just due to that points deduction, but they're off the bottom now, and what a second half from Tom Lawrence. If we're asking characters to step up, you know, the club captain at the moment, two unbelievable moments of quality. The first goal was absolutely brilliant as he dazzled his way in and out of people. The second goal taken with his left foot, the run from Ebeselli for that goal as well. More will continue to come out of Derby as the next few weeks go on, and you know, leading up to deadline day, we'll sort of see what the squad's looking like by then. But the fact that they're off the bottom of the table now, and of course external circumstances can have an influence on what happens for Derby for the rest of the season, but suddenly it's looking possible, isn't it now? Next up then to Fulham 6, Bristol City 2, and I mean, we all saw this coming, you know, Fulham clicking back up into gear, but the goals they're scoring at the moment and throughout the season really has been ridiculous, almost off the scale from what we've ever seen in the Championship. But this was a fascinating game because I didn't realise going into this game that Bristol City actually had a decent record whenever they'd gone to Craven Cottage, and they took the lead twice in this game. Two quite similar goals really, both coming from Semenyo, both times obviously Bristol City were on the break, but two cracking finishes. He's quite comfortable on either his left or right foot. The first one's brilliantly taken before Mitrovic levels it up. Semenyo then gets Bristol City back in front, but Mitrovic with another hat-trick for the season, Cabana with a couple, and Carvalho with a brilliant finish from outside the box as well. This Fulham side have now scored 64 goals in 25 matches this season, which is just ridiculous compared to the rest of the league. No one touches them in that aspect. Next then to Huddersfield up against Swansea, and really aim at two halves in this one. Huddersfield started the game out as the brighter of the two sides, creating chances. Ultimately they get their goal on the 15-minute mark, but towards the end of that first half you could sense Swansea sort of growing back into this one, and in the second half itself it seemed to be really sort of one-way traffic. One of our probably criticisms of Swansea so far this season has been, you know, they've looked nice on the ball, sort of playing through the gears and stuff like that, but actually creating clear-cut chances in the final third has been a little bit of an issue for them at times. In this game that wasn't the case. It was actually a lack of clinical ability which probably cost them from getting all 3 points in the end. There was some lovely interplay with their sort of wide men and wing backs overlapping, you know, balls getting cut back and chances created in that way. Downs got them back into the game at 1-1, and if it wasn't for Lee Nichols having an absolute worldie of a game in net for Huddersfield, Swansea probably go on to win this one. So yeah, really impressive stuff there from the away side. I'd like to see more of that sort of continue as the season goes on. One interesting point from the weekend though is the current situation surrounding Jamie Patterson, which we'll go into in a little bit more detail in tomorrow's transfer rumour roundup video, but I'd be interested to get some takes from Swansea fans on that one because yeah, all looks like it could get a little bit messy there. Next then we go to Middlesbrough up against Reading. Much improved from Reading in this one, albeit they still end up falling short. What will have probably given them a bit of a confidence boost really is seeing Peterborough's result at the weekend. I think that Peterborough had the real chance to apply some, you know, pressure on Reading with how things have been going for them, but they have still got that little bit of breathing space between themselves and the bottom three, and they actually took the lead in this one. Dilly Bashir with a great ball into Andy Carroll in what could be his last game for Reading. Obviously his contract has now run out with Reading, and that would be quite the blow because I think he's added quite a bit to this Reading side actually, not in terms of maybe like a prolific goal scorer or anything like that, but bringing the presence about Reading to their play in the final third. You know, certainly a massive upgrade on Puskas, who they were, you know, persistent with before Carroll came in. The only benefit I could see maybe is, you know, Lucas João being back now. You know, he got on for the end of this game, albeit they're sort of relying on him to instantly hit the ground running, which, you know, isn't always sustainable. But Middlesbrough managed to turn this one around, and it was 2 goals from Matt Crooks. There's been quite a bit of, you know, talk lately about Borough's forwards and, you know, what impact are they all going to have and things like that, but an old school sort of player in Matt Crooks being the bearer of bad news for Reading. 2 really nicely taken goals in that aspect. Tavernier with the first assist and then Isaiah Jones with the second. Middlesbrough on a few occasions this season have left things late as well, haven't they? But yeah, the bounce continues to happen under Wilder. That's now 4 wins on the bounce for Borough. Next then we have Forest getting back to winning ways as they picked up all 3 points at the Den. Lewis Graben's 91st minute winner being enough to separate the two sides in this one. And throughout the 90, there didn't seem to be a whole lot in this one. You know, as we expect with away sides going to the Den, you know, Millwall always tend to keep things quite tight here. First half, the home side probably had the better of as well. You could definitely see Forest sort of growing into the game later on into that first half. But in terms of, you know, some of the chances and the play around the box and things like that, Millwall probably went into half time as the happier of the two sides, but second half flipped the switch a little bit, and Forest in the end probably doing enough to go on and win this game. Benikofobe had the best chance for Millwall, but Bryce Samba was level to that one in terms of the save, and the winner from Graven, I mean, it's all about the work from Brennan Johnson, you know, carrying the ball from the halfway line. In the end, the ball falls to Lewis Graben, who gets his, you know, second winner in the week really after that Arsenal one, and this sets up such a fascinating game next week now between Forest and Derby, which has come at such an interesting time of the season, and both teams are playing really well in the grand scheme of things, so that one is going to be such a difficult one to separate because, yeah, there's so many sort of off the field circumstances to take into consideration for that game. Next up then we go to Peterborough up against Coventry, and such a disappointing display from Peterborough in the end, because we said in the preview coming into this one that this was a real opportunity for Posh to really put down a statement of intent with how Reading had been going recently. You know, they were in, you know, and still are in touching distance in the grand scheme of things of Peterborough, but to serve up that performance up against the Coventry side, who haven't exactly been firing on all cylinders in the weeks leading up into this one, it was a really poor showing, and the tone was sort of set by, you know, Gustavo Hamer's goal from like 30 yards out at the start of this one. No idea what Cornell's doing with this one. Obviously Peterborough have recently signed a goalkeeper on loan for the season, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Cornell dropped for the weeks to come. But yeah, it's been a while since we've seen a sort of thunderbolt from Gustavo Hamer, albeit the goalkeeper should have done a little bit better with that one. Matty Golden with two nice finishes as well, and an own goal from Thompson. The only saving grace really was Grant's finish in this one, which was a really quite a cultured goal in the end. But Peterborough were weak at the back, and we've said that about them so many times throughout the season so far, and Coventry had a bit more of a spring in their step in this one, which is something that we, you know, became more accustomed to seeing with Coventry in those first few weeks and months of the season. So maybe this is a, you know, sort of spell of them getting back to their best. Next then to Deepdale for a 1-1 draw between Preston and Birmingham, and I think that this was a real example of how the play style has changed under Lowe so far. I think that in terms of, you know, building the play out from the back, in terms of how we played the ball into the final third, some of our movements, and actually having a lot more attacking intent actually about us today, I thought was really nice to see actually. First half, Preston definitely had the better of. Probably could have had more than the one goal we got in this one. Took a bit of a deflection, Alan Brown's shot, in the end off Patrick Bauer, as Preston went in 1-0 at half time. Second half then, the game becomes really quite stretched. Birmingham were certainly growing into it. They had a much improved second half, but Preston still had the chances to kill this game off. There were two moments especially, one with Emile Rees and one with Ched Evans. If either of them had slipped in Daniel Johnson with a decent enough pass, DJ suddenly in for a one-on-one. In the end that doesn't happen, and we're made to pay for sort of messing up those chances really, and Birmingham get back into it through Scott Hogan. A few players that impressed me from Birmingham's point of view. Tindon Menji impressed me at the back. There was a real sort of battle going on throughout the 90 minutes between him and Ched Evans, and even from a North End's point of view, I've got no idea how Evans didn't end up with at least a yellow card at the end of this match. But yeah, a real battle between them two, and I thought that he did quite well for himself in this one. But frustrating from a North End's point of view really, because I definitely think that we created enough chances in the final third to win this one. It was just that lack of sort of clinical ability which really cost us here. But credit to Birmingham for sort of growing into the game and how they used their subs in the second half. And then for the last game we had on Saturday, it was QPR beating West Brom by 1-0, and this sort of signifies two clubs who are very much going in different directions at the moment in terms of the form and the grand scheme of things, of how things are actually shaping up in the Championship, and that probably mostly signified by QPR going above West Brom in the league table now. But QPR have only lost now 2 of their last 11 matches, and on the flip side of that, West Brom have only won 2 of their last 11 matches, which is really quite damning for them, and especially coming off the back of another really quite disappointing performance in this one. Now, for my prediction, I was struggling to separate these two, as, you know, different issues at each club at the moment means that neither of them are completely at full strength, and so we can't properly judge this one, you know, as two teams going up against each other, because, you know, neither of them were at full strength. But QPR definitely making the better of who was available to them, and some really nice individual performances. Barbitt looked really good at the back for QPR, Willock as well, you know, that sort of creative onus really falling on him now that Chair's away. He got the assist in the end, brilliant ball into the box for the former West Brom man Charlie Austin to stick the ball away. A penalty appeal, which is probably going to be the most talked about thing in this game, in the comments down below. Honest, I struggle with this one really. I think that in the Premier League, if the referee gives that as a penalty and VAR looks at it, I don't think that that decision would be overturned, because there were two hands in the back from Johansson, albeit it did look a little bit soft, and like, you know, Townsend went down fairly easily under the contact. The problem for West Brom is, though, a side with as much talent in the starting 11 as they do shouldn't be reliant on, you know, late penalty calls in order to get back into matches, because the overall performance over 90 minutes just wasn't good. You know, they didn't have a shot on target in the second half. They brought on Daryl DK, who tried, you know, his best to offer them something, but the service just wasn't there. And like we were saying when they brought in DK, that's a huge signing for the rest of the season, but by himself, he doesn't fix all their problems. And then last of all, we had Stoke beating Hull by 2-0, by far and away the best we've seen of Stoke in quite some time, this one for me. A lot of players stepping up for this game, and just when they needed it really. You know, the top six was suddenly starting to get a little bit away from them in terms of the recent results that they've had in the league, but no, much better from Stoke in this one. Wright Phillips up front next to Brown seemed to work really well off each other. The midfield had total control over this one. Klukas always seems to have a great game against his former clubs, doesn't he? But he was brilliant for this game in midfield, 2 assists in this one. And someone who's, you know, out of nowhere starting to revive their career a little bit is Tom Ince, who was sort of playing in one of those roles in midfield, in that sort of number 10 role. He took his goal brilliantly in the second half. He's someone who's been a little bit wasted at Stoke, probably because he's seen his career just sort of dwindle away from him in the years that he has been at Stoke. You know, he's been a disappointing signing in terms of the money they outlaid on him, but finally he seems to be having a little bit of a purple patch for them. First look at Jagielka coming into that side next to Harwood Bellis as well. In terms of Hull, I thought they were really poor for this one. Their midfield was totally overrun throughout the game really. They struggled to get control of any of it, had little to nothing going forward for them. But much improved from Stoke from this one. But those were all the matches that we had going on in the Championship over the weekend. As always, make sure to get your thoughts in the comments down below of any of the matches that you went to, or any talking points that you'd like to pick up on. And now we also have 4 matches in midweek to go ahead and preview, which have been rearranged from some of those cancelled games in previous weeks. So let's jump into them. So starting out at Craven Cottage on Tuesday night, we got Fulham going up against Birmingham. I obviously got to see Birmingham firsthand at the weekend against Preston, and although it was a much improved second half performance, Fulham are just built different at the moment, and the amount of goals they have in that side at the moment is scary, because they can score from absolutely all angles. I think in the reverse fixture earlier on in the season, Fulham put 4 goals past Birmingham. I think they might do the same in this one. I'm going to go 4-0 Fulham in this one. That's not a knock on Birmingham. Fulham are just that good at the moment. Preston going up against Sheffield United next is an interesting one. Sheffield United quite disappointing at the weekend with that loss against Derby. Preston on the whole I thought played quite well actually against Birmingham. It was just our lack of sort of any clinical ability in the final third which cost us. The one area where I am a little bit concerned for North End going into this one is after the full-time whistle against Birmingham, we looked absolutely shattered. Like, we looked like dead out on our feet. So I'm assuming we'll need to make some changes coming into this one just to freshen up the squad a little bit. But for a prediction, I'll back North End to get a point from this one. I'll go 1-1, although maybe if we are looking jaded, Sheffield United could edge that one. But I'll back us for a 1-1 in that one. Into Wednesday's games, we've got Hull going up against Blackburn. Hull really disappointing at the weekend. I'm going to go for a 2-0 Blackburn away win in that game. And then for Reading up against Luton, massive game here in Reading season. I mean, they all seem to be at the moment for them, don't they, in terms of using these games in hand to their advantage now to try and bridge any sort of gap between themselves and the bottom 3. But Luton I was really impressed with over the weekend, and I'm just going to edge Luton for a 2-1 away victory, although a draw in that one wouldn't surprise me, but I'll just edge Luton in that one. So as you can see to the side of me, those are my score predictions heading into the midweek fixtures in the Championship. As always, make sure to get your thoughts down below. But apart from that, guys, that will now wrap it up for today's video. So thank you very much for watching. As always, make sure to get your thoughts and score predictions in the comments down below. If you did go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like, and I'll see you all in the next one.